Now I know that we all enjoy the sweet sounds produced by the dacid tones of songs. We want to hear songs of joy, songs of fear, songs of love, and songs of hate. Now I want to produce musical pieces on an orchestral scale, but I'm in need of someone or something who are capable of playing and performing musical numbers. Well, that's right. Welcome back once again to another tier list where today I am going to go through and rank all Bloodborne bosses on how well I think they could play in an orchestra. Now, today's criteria will be this: teamworking skills, patience, coordination, ability to read and or learn to read sheet music, attention to detail, their want to practice, and of course, what instrument they would play. But before we kick in, I will not be going over the Chalice dungeon bosses, just the main game bosses and the DLC bosses. Now, as always, let's hop right in and see who is an orchestral aficionado and who is a band bust. Well, welcome again, once again, to the legendary tier list. So today, we're going to start things off with the Cleric Beast. Now, we all know about the fantastic voice the Cleric Beast has, screaming in pain and ensuring we hear every second of it. Of course, that means the beast obviously has some large lungs to produce such pleasant noises, which is of course good for a woodwind or brass instrument, but with one large arm and one smaller arm, it may have some issues with coordination, as it may not be the best at pressing down on some valves or whatnot. I do not think it would be the best in many categories set out in the criteria, as it is a human-turned beast who is just ravenous and in need of some hunter's red liquid. I find that the Cleric Beast would play a larger instrument though, something like a tuba, and would play pretty dang poorly. So of course, overall, I find that the Cleric Beast deserves to be placed at least one tier above the bottom, and so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place the Cleric Beast into the D tier. Up next, we have the hunter who became a little too invested in his work, Father Gusco. The first thing I do have to note is that he is in fact blind, as indicated by the very first cutscene when you enter the boss arena. And so of course he couldn't see the conductor moving around when he's playing his instrument. Maybe we could place some iron and like sweetly scented liquid on the conductor or their wand to help Gusco figure out the wand moving to and fro. Now, Father Gusco may not be there entirely, mentally, but does have the patience and at least some seance of coordination, since he keeps being able to fight on, even though he forgets about anything other than the hunt. I do not think he would have much teamworking skills or abilities, nor attention to detail, nor care to learn some sheet music to catch him up to speed. I think, though, if he were to play an instrument, that he would play something along the lines of the trombone, something he could swing around and whatnot while playing. Overall, I do find Father Gusco at least a little bit better than that of the Cleric Beast, and so I'm going to place him a tier above and go ahead and place him into the C tier. So next we have the peeled and flabby skinned Bloodstarved Beast. I mean, I think immediately about the smell that beast would produce from their skin and like the poison they have and how bad and pungent it would be, which means it can't be anywhere near something like the brass or the woodwind sections, as they obviously need their air. Now, the beast seems pretty bad in all categories, as it is literally just that, just a beast. It would just flail around angrily and swing at whatever, and wouldn't care nor listen to any of the reprimands that the conductor gives it when the conductor realizes the commotion the beast is making. If it somehow were to play some sort of instrument, which I seriously doubt it would, I would think that it'd be something in percussion, maybe something like the xylophone. Overall, the Bloodstarved Beast seems to be a pretty bad choice to let participate in the orchestra, and so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to throw them all the way at the bottom into the F tier. So now we have the head of the healing church, Vicar Amelia. Now, she used just a little bit too much old blood and became the beast with the mane that us hunters have to fight. I mean, throughout her fight, I will note, however, that she does engage us purely out of fear, as she knows what happens to people who become beasts. I find that Vicar Amelia, still at the point of the boss battle, has her sanity well off, and therefore can still be a pretty good member of an orchestra. I mean, literally being a head of an organization, she obviously has coordination and teamwork, and could pay attention to detail while the conductor asks her to play louder. I think she's well versed in her abilities, and she'd be able to play any solo part we ask of her with grace and clarity. Of course, she still clutches her pendant with one hand, so I think she would play something like the pan flute with one hand with a moderate but manageable amount of difficulty. Now, overall, I find that Vicar Amelia still has the opportunity to be first chair in her orchestral abilities, and will therefore give her high honors of being the first to go all the way at the top into the S tier. So now we have the eye-collecting old lady, the Witch of Hemwick. Now, of course, she seems to have a tendency to spawn in mad ones and hide, which in turn means she would have stage fright and need to be towards the back of the orchestra. She does use her arcane magics, though, and seems to have a seance of coordination, which is obviously okay. But other than that, I find that she would just try and steal eyeballs of either the conductor or her fellow musicians next to her when they glance over at her and see that she isn't really doing anything. The Witch of Hemwick does at least have patience, coordination, and a bit of teamwork, but otherwise, she really isn't the best. I find that she'd want to be in the back and want an easy instrument to play, like the tambourine. But overall, I find that the Witch of Hemwick is just not the best to play some sweet tunes, and therefore, I'm going to keep her out of the F tier, but I'm going to go ahead and place her into the D tier. So now with the snake appendages, we have the Shadow of Yrum, the three fellows in the black robes. Of course, I will note their coordination and teamwork with one another immediately, which means they seem to do well in a team setting. They seem pretty okay with their abilities, even using like giant serpents to help them out. I just don't know if they'd have too much care to play in an orchestra. I think they would just prefer to serve their queen and gank hunters that enter their arena. But they would be great with their snake arms and appendages, and their fellow summonable serpents could help them, which make, like, I don't know, an entire percussion line. So, for the Shadow of Yrum, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm not gonna place them all the way at the top, but I am gonna go ahead and throw them into the A tier. They would be S tier if they really cared to practice and play. So, of course, with another Soulsborne game, we have another spider boss for the arachnophobic fans out there, Rom the Vacuous Spider. Rom has a large crowd of spiders, so there's, of course, more participants for the orchestra. But I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing. I think Rom would have the spiders listen to her, but not to the other people around her. It would be more like an infestation than any sort of real help. Rom is herself courteous and kind, and she is a barrier for preventing normal people to see the horrors that surround them. So she is definitely a team player and would have patience and care, at least, to listen to the conductor. But Rom doesn't seem too capable of playing really any instrument. I mean, same with her spider subordinates. Maybe she could play something like the cymbals by like straight up just ramming into him. But overall, I find Rom to have the heart, but not the technical skills required. So I am going to go ahead and I'm going to place Rom the Vacuous Spider into the B tier. I still think she can manage to be at least decent in the orchestra. So up next, we now have the big ol' wonky camera boss, that being the Dark Beast. I mean, there really isn't too much to say about the electric skeletal dog. Due to the electricity, it is potentially harmful to others around it and a possible fire hazard for, like, the curtains on the stage. The Dark Beast doesn't care to play, has no real motivation, and is just not real orchestral material overall. The instrument choice would be obvious, though, the electric triangle. But with that being said, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to throw the Dark Beast all the way at the bottom and place it into the F tier. So now we have another amalgamation, the one Reborn. I mean, once again, my first thought comes to the smell that that thing must produce. So it needs to be far away again from the brass and woodwind sections. The one Reborn is just some lump of decaying body parts made by a bunch of wishes as an experiment to try and ascend humankind, which obviously did not work. I mean, I think that the one Reborn is just going to be like a beast in terms of its mindset. But hey, look on the bright side. With all those toes and fingers, it could probably play something well, given that it wants to. And of course, it wouldn't want to. So it has some technical skills to a degree, but other than that, it would fail in pretty much all categories. I'll give it an instrument that's somewhat hard for like fingers or even toes, like the piano or an organ. And with that, I'll be nice and give the benefit of the doubt due to literally the hands and fingers and toes and whatnot, and keep the one Reborn out of the F tier and place them into the D tier. So next is the protector of the vile secret of the castle, Martyr Larus. I mean, Larus is weaker and somewhat mummified at his age and seems to have a lot of free time before a certain hunter shows up. I think that Larus is a very capable person who, in his free time, would graciously learn to play like any instrument and sheet music someone gives him. We know he's a team player as he protects and stands watch over a great deal of time. He is patient and coordinated. He cares for the well-being of his fellow musicians. He would have to play an instrument that doesn't require air, as he doesn't really have lips to form a seal around any mouthpiece anymore. So I'm thinking something elegant though, like the violin. But overall, Martyr Larus seems to be like a great addition to the orchestra. So I'm gonna place him all the way at the top and throw him into the S tier. Next is Amydala, one with multiple appendages and therefore multiple opportunities for instruments. Now, we know that Amydala is a well-liked Great One due to all of the statues that it has, so maybe it is an okay team player, maybe it just likes being worshipped, and therefore wants the solo during the music. I find that Amydala is a creature with many talents, but does not have a care too fondly to produce wonderful tones for the human ear. Amydala would not care to listen or pay attention to the conductors or, accept any real criticisms, and just wants to do something like perform
freeform jazz.
Amydala would probably want an instrument that is revered for its difficulty, so I'm thinking of something like 3 or 4 harps at the same time. Overall, Amydala has some difficulties, but would still be an alright musician, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place them into the B tier. Next is the ET Great One, the Celestial Emissary, and its band of misfit minions. Now, are you telling me that that big old noggin of theirs wouldn't be able to store and play music to the highest level with no issue? I don't think so. The Celestial Emissary is one who ascended and therefore could play any instrument with ease that would leave the audience in complete and total tears after their eardrums just experienced heaven. Now, I think due to the minions, it could be a team player and make an entire band section, and the minions would play overall pretty well too. The Emissary may think it as being better than that of all the other musicians, and it could probably back it up, but would still play as long as it is declared ultra first chair or something. Now, it would also play a Brainiac-like instrument too, such as the oboe, but overall, I find that the Celestial Emissary is worthy enough to be placed all the way at the top and thrown into the S tier. Next is the obviously no woodwind or brass instrument cage-wearing Mikulesh, host of the Nightmare. I mean, who could forget chasing the Mad Lad all around the arena? Mikulesh is just gone mentally, so he would probably just make up a melody on his own with his instrument and not read the sheet music in front of him, nor really go along with his fellow musicians. Now, he is at least patient and does to an extent have some form of coordination, but that's really about it. Mikulesh would play an instrument not meant for an orchestral setting. I mean, something like just a moonshine jug that he could barely get air over due to the cage around his head. Now, Mikulesh, host of the Nightmare, is just not the best, but still has some things going for him, maybe? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place him into the D tier. Now we move on to Eladus, Daughter of the Cosmos, who is interesting to say the least. She is a great one who does want to coexist with humans, so she is good to go in terms of teamwork. Now, she might have a few issues in terms of technicalities when playing due to the whole split face, so she may have some issues with reading sheet music. Eladus just seems to be a great team player and can probably perform pretty exceptionally, but would have a few difficulties still. I find that she would play something in the strings like the cello, as it isn't really confirmed if she even has a mouth or not. But overall, Eladus, Daughter of the Cosmos, is pretty good, and therefore I'm going to throw her into the A tier. So now we have Margos Wet Nurse, who can manage to at least keep a baby relatively safe during the boss fight. So Margos Wet Nurse is just another General Grievous with 6 arms instead of 4, and an invisible or non-existent head, which means we keep them out of the woodwind and brass section, of course. But Margos Wet Nurse has some form of protective instinct, which I'm not too sure how that really correlates to the orchestra. I mean, I think that it means that it at least has some teamworking skills and would back up the 2nd and 3rd and 4th chairs and stuff like that. And it could be okay with patience and consideration. I do think that the Wet Nurse is far from perfect, and it might not be able to see the conductor's wand due to the whole, no face conundrum. I think that Margos Wet Nurse would play something simple though, such as the gong. But overall, I'm just gonna place them into the middle and throw them into the C tier. It just seems kind of mid for the orchestra. We now have the Moon Presence, who is wanting to eliminate other great ones, which looks pretty bad for its teamworking abilities. The Moon Presence manipulates all of the Hunter's Dream, so maybe it can manipulate the tones of whoever plays out of tune or off beat to ensure that it sounds perfect. The Moon Presence, I know, would be the one who wants to be the conductor, so we'll just go with that as their instrument. I think that the Moon Presence has some serious potential, but we think that they could just manipulate and wouldn't care to practice, only perform. Moon Presence would also just remove anyone who disagrees with them. Of course, that can be an issue. But overall, the Moon Presence would be, I think, an okay-ish conductor. So I'm going to place them into the B tier. So up next we have the final boss of the main game, Gman the First Hunter. Now Gman fights us only to ensure we do not suffer the same fate as him, while we fight him to finally free him from the nightmares. So he, of course, is the ultimate team player, caring for us more than him. He'd absolutely care for his fellow musicians like they were his children. I mean, washing their mouthpieces and like ensuring that their suits are put on perfectly during the performance. Gman is patient, he cares, he has the technical skill and patience to play an instrument in an orchestral setting. I mean, he's like a prime example of being the perfect musician. Now, I think he would play something gentle and relaxing too, like the flute or the piccolo. Overall, I see no issues with placing Gman the First Hunter all the way at the top and putting him into the S tier. So now let's move on to the DLC bosses. First off, we have Lwig the Accursed, who I immediately think would have some form of stage fright until he looks into his holy moonlight sword and calms himself down, which means he needs that big old thing on the stage to perform well. Lwig seems to be wanting to fight and make more red water for the river, and doesn't really want to do anything else. He's just too far gone and would want to swing that big old sword around and cut off Chloe's clarinet. With the extra long face and horse lips, I'm going to say that Lwig the Accursed would play something complex in the brass section though, like the French horn. But overall, I'm pretty unconvinced that Lwig the Accursed is capable of being in the orchestra, and so I'm going to throw him all the way at the bottom and put him into the F tier. So now we have the Orphan, who has lived for approximately 4 minutes until the hunter gets it, the Orphan of Cos. Now with that permanent grin attached and the screaming going on the entire time after its birth, the Orphan has the lungs needed, but definitely doesn't have the brain capacity or technical skills necessary. It's literally a baby. The Orphan is gross, I mean, probably too gross for others, and doesn't know how to share and therefore has like 0 teamwork skills. I mean, once again, the Orphan is just a literal baby and therefore has no abilities in the orchestra. If it were to play, it would play something close to a baby rattle, probably something like the maracas. But I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to keep up and place the Orphan all the way at the bottom and throw them into the F tier. So now we have the underling of Gman, Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower. She's well versed, she was presumed a corpse, she has a doll made in her likeness. I think Lady Maria is one of the ones I would highly consider to play for me. Now, she may be a little depressed due to her sacrilegious background, which means she may not have her heart fully invested, but I think she does have a lot of skills required. She seems elegant in her battle, and I think she'd be extremely meticulous in her actions, which is perfect. If she played, I would imagine Lady Maria playing an elegant instrument such as like a lyre. Overall, I do think she would be almost perfect, and so I am going to place Lady Maria into the A tier. I'm just kind of worried about the depression aspect and her heart and where it would be. So next up is the Celestial Minions with a melted face, the Living Failures. I mean, they're basically just the same as the Celestial Minions, but now their heads are just melted and they don't really do much. No eyeballs for the conductor to stare into, no ears to hear their tones and ensure that they're playing correctly, just a group of things hanging out. The Living Failures do at least show teamwork, but otherwise, that's really it. The Living Failures would play something alien-like though, like the theremin. Overall, I find that the Living Failures to be just pretty much bland and meh, and so they're mid, and I'm gonna go ahead and place them into the C tier. So lastly on this list, we have the big fella who didn't learn or fear the old blood, Lawrence the First Vicar. I mean, he's just another Cleric Beast, but now on fire, and loses his legs once he gets his health low enough. So just take everything about the Cleric Beast and add in some flames, and you end up with just one huge fire hazard that ensures the stage goes up in flames. Which, I mean, it would look cool for ambiance for like 14 seconds until the stage literally starts to collapse. So Lawrence would have to play something fireproofed, something like the hand pan, but this one is pretty obvious, and I'm going to go ahead and end this tier list by placing Lawrence the First Vicar all the way at the bottom into the F tier. Lawrence, you should have actually feared the old blood. And there is another pertinent question that, of course, the entire Bloodborne community has been asking. We now know which bosses would be the best at performing in the orchestra, and who would absolutely ruin it. Now, tune in next week where we answer another one of the most important questions of all time in a more recent game. But for now, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, adios.